Thank you so much. I want to claim the best job in the world. If everyone here is claiming it, mine is the best job in the world. But I also really want to claim what a phenomenal experience I have had going through the Ashoka process. I remember years ago when Ika and I first started Just for Kids Law, and someone told us about Ashoka, and we looked at your website, and we were like, oh, this will never be us. It felt so far away at that point. So to be there now, 5 years later, is a huge achievement. And when I started out on the Ashoka path, someone said to me, it's a very, very in-depth process. They're going to know everything about your life. And I didn't really mind. I don't have anything to hide. But I was like, oh, my gosh, I don't have any time. That's what I was worried about. I don't have any time. But I loved the whole experience. And working with Jenny and Julia was fantastic. I feel like I got to know you guys so well. You gave me so much. And then going to Stockholm was just one of the greatest experiences. I will never forget sitting in that greenhouse for 3 hours where we sat and talked. It was just a phenomenal experience. It was extremely nerve-wracking. I had no idea what the outcome was going to be. I felt like actors did when they were auditioning. But I'm so glad to be here and to be here on behalf of the work that I love doing, because I have the best job in the world. When I left university, I had no idea where my life was going to take me, none whatsoever. I wasn't one of those people who was driven from an early age. But when I went to work with Clive Stafford Smith in the southern United States, representing children who are facing the death penalty, I undoubtedly sealed my destiny. There was never a worse moment for me as a 25-year-old than hearing a jury of 12 people decide, deliberate, and determine to execute a young black teenager who was innocent of the crime of which he'd been charged. But the anger, I think I've been lucky enough to channel over the years, because at times I thought it would cripple me, and that was one of those times. And now I'm able to channel it into the work that I do. It was a rude awakening into the injustice system, but it's really been able to be my focal point from here on in. And what it really taught me, that lesson of being on trial with Ryan when he got sentenced to death, was how to stick with it. There were so many times when I wanted to give up. I wanted to walk away. And even I left the States, but I still carried on working on Ryan's case. And the lesson came back to me when 9 years later, I got to walk down the aisle of the church with Ryan at his sister's wedding. He was the groomsman. He'd just been released that year, and I was her bridesmaid. And so I think what I will never lose from that experience is that how patience and how sticking with something really makes it all worthwhile. So it may seem that after my time in the States, there is nothing that could be comparable here in the UK, because obviously we don't have the death penalty. But the kids Ika and I represent and work with here have lived the same lives of those that we represented in the States. They don't end up executed, but often they do end up futureless. And so when Ika and I set up Just for Kids Law in 2006, we knew that we wanted to provide the children in the criminal justice system with the highest standard of legal representation. We felt that they deserved it just by the fact that they were kids, that they should have a chance to show their lives again. But that just wasn't enough. And we could see, even when we left them at the courtroom doors, that although we may have won the case or got a good result, we weren't even touching the surface of the problems that were happening in those kids' lives. But we couldn't do that. We were the lawyers, and we had a very narrow role. That was to represent them in the criminal justice system. But we could see that with some proper intervention, support, and friendship, they could reach their potential, as they should be entitled to do. And so that was what we set out to do. And so I think the way to describe Just for Kids Law is the lawyers provide the backbone to the organisation, and the youth work really provides the flesh, really provides the support to the people, so that we can make those people the whole person, the most that they can be. I personally love being a lawyer because I love using the law to protect and zealously pursue what we know the young people we work with are entitled to. When our community care department sends out a legal letter threatening action against a local authority that has failed a child, it's amazing to see how the services pour in straight away, and a child who they've refused to accommodate for 2 months is suddenly put in supported housing, a full college placement, and being paid maintenance. And today we've just heard, for example, that the High Court has granted us permission on the lack of protection for 17-year-olds in the police station, despite the fact that Nick Herbert and all the government ministers have been writing to every charitable organisation throughout the summer, saying they've no plans to change the law to protect 17-year-olds. But there is a real problem in our society that as lawyers we probably can't change. And it's a failure in allowing the people we work with to progress. And I understand that no one wants them to fail. I really know no one wants them to fail. But that's a very different thing from actually wanting them to succeed. And wanting them to succeed is a proactive thing and something that people have to invest in to do. We are busy criminalizing a generation of children. We criminalize nearly as many people as the United States. We criminalize more than anywhere else in Europe. And labeling them in this way will never allow them to achieve what they could. In the UK, we lock up children in prisons that cost us as taxpayers 3 times more than it would cost to send your child to Eton. 3 times more than Eton. Yet they come out with no GCSEs, and their networks don't get them into Downing Street. Instead, they're locked up in a cell for 23 hours a day, teenage boys, and released with their new contacts and £10 in their pocket. And so how can any of us in society be surprised when we see the reoffending rates at 70% for these children? So I can't attest to us being innovative, but I do know that we care about the children that we represent. And that in itself is the real privilege of our work, and why I think we have the best job in the world. Because often lawyers are told not to care. When I was a barrister here in the UK, I was told not to get emotionally involved with my clients and not to care for them. And Clive, when I worked in the States, said, how can you do that? How can you represent them unless you get emotionally involved? How can you beg for their lives unless you know them to their very core? And that's something that we continue here in the UK in Just for Kids. And we know that we can't always change the outcome of a case, but we can improve the experience and where that young person will be when the experience is over. We all know that prevention is cheaper than cure. Everyone in medicine knows that. Yet there's no investment in opportunities for the young people that we work with. So I just wanted to tell you a quick story about some of our young people. I could tell you stories about all of them, but I'm going to pick the 2 girls here. You may not know that they're both girls, but they are, in the bottom corner. We've worked with them now for nearly 2 years, and it's a very different story from when we first met them. When we first met them, our youth advocates, they were both in trouble with the law. They'd both been thrown out of school, mainly for temper issues. They've got anger management issues. And our youth advocate sat down with them to try and write down their CV and put some positive words about themselves on there. When the girls were looking on the screen at what was written, they couldn't bear to see positive things about them, and they started deleting the words on the keyboard. And Sabine, who's there, our youth worker at the end, grabbed their hands because all her hard work was being deleted. And the girls, I can't remember, it was at Tamsin, started headbutting the keyboard, so desperate to get rid of the words that were written up there about there, and used swear words that Rob will be very glad I'm not going to use. Because my 7-year-old is here, and I know that if I use those swear words, he'll say, "Mummy." But they started swearing at Sabine and basically walked out of there. But 2 years later, we've been working with those girls continuously, and they're now ambassadors at Just for Kids. They attend all of our events. Dylan is gardening, which is something she's always wanted to do, and Tamsin is in college. And this summer, they went with a member of our staff and worked for 3 days at Port Eliot Festival, doing brilliant stuff with all of the artists and the musicians there. And just last night, in fact, I think they were at the House of Commons speaking about their experiences in the justice system, albeit with many expletives still included, apparently. So I have no doubt that their lives are more fulfilled, even if it doesn't mean that they're perfect. And we have really, really loved working with them. We have such high demand for our services that we're turning away at least 5 kids a week, but we want to expand. We've got one office. We've started our first office in West London and opened our second office in North London earlier in the year. And next year we want to set up an office in South London and in 2014 in East London, because we know what we do works and we want to spread this to others. So I'm going to leave you with our favourite quote. I often pass it over because we use it so much. But then I remembered today when I was thinking about it, we use it so much because it's so appropriate. And maybe it's even more appropriate today with Obama being elected in for the second term, as it's from the great African-American writer James Baldwin, in which he says, "For these are all our children, and we will either profit or pay for whatever they become." Thank you very much.